The World Health Organization declares the coronavirus a pandemic. Chinese officials have invented a terrifying way to make money. And why Taiwan is doing such a good job containing the coronavirus. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Hey, have you ever wondered what the coronavirus actually feels like? Well, let's find out from a man who got it in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began.
It felt like I could only use half my lung capacity, and every breath that I took wasn't enough, and I just couldn't get enough air. Also, it sounded like I was breathing through a paper bag. I mean, it sounded like there was just stuff in my lungs that just wouldn't go away.
Well, now you know. Good thing, too, because the coronavirus has finally been labeled a pandemic by the horribly corrupt World Health Organization. Wait, what is going on in that picture? Apparently, it's a statue that was originally set up for an upcoming festival that is now canceled because of the coronavirus. And now, it's public health art. The coronavirus is now also spreading within the United States. People who have not traveled overseas or been exposed to people who did travel have contracted the coronavirus. As of recording, the death toll in the US has risen to 30, and the National Guard has been sent to New York. You know, I really loved Escape from New York, but I'd rather not live it. Meanwhile, the NBA. Just last summer, the NBA had been looking forward to expanding its China partnerships. Until, of course, the brouhaha over Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's support for the Hong Kong protests. That didn't go well. And now, the NBA has the coronavirus. Okay, more specifically, Utah Jazz center Rudy Gobert has the coronavirus. And as a precaution, the NBA has suspended its season until further notice. Meanwhile, the Chinese Basketball Association has told Americans who play for the CBA that they have to return to China to finish out the season. If they don't, they could be banned for life. Don't worry, I'm sure it's totally safe. But if these American basketball players do return to China, they'll be put in quarantine for 2 weeks. That's because China is now quarantining all international arrivals. Yes, the country where the coronavirus began, that said it was absolutely ridiculous when other countries began instituting travel bans and quarantining travelers from China, is now quarantining anyone who arrives in China. I love the smell of hypocrisy in the morning. And coming up after the break, Chinese Communist officials have figured out a clever way to make millions of dollars. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The People's Republic of China has the world's second biggest economy. It wasn't always like that, but over the last several decades, Chinese communist officials have gotten really good at making money. See, back in the 1950s, Chairman Mao Zedong told his officials to kill rich people and take their stuff. But that only went so far because eventually China ran out of rich people to kill. So in the early 2000s, three-legged money toad and Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin led a brilliant new scheme. It combined the best elements of communism and cutthroat capitalism. Kill dissidents and take their organs, and then sell those organs to rich people at state-run hospitals, like this one. And it turns out you can make some serious money this way. You know, they say you can't put a value on human life, but in communist China, that value is up to $852,000. Now, this money-making scheme looks too horrible to be true, and that's one reason why people don't believe it is happening. But the proof keeps coming out. There have been investigations into organ harvesting since 2006, but they didn't get much attention. Then, a group called the China Tribunal held a series of hearings about it starting in 2018. They asked for evidence and testimony on whether forced organ harvesting was happening in China. And in particular, they looked at whether Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs were being targeted. Falun Gong is based on ancient Chinese spiritual practices. It has exercises that look a bit like Tai Chi, and its core philosophy is truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Falun Gong became super popular in China in the 1990s until Jiang Zemin realized there were like 100 million people practicing. And so he remedied that with this, and this, and this, Take that, compassion. The Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic minority who live mostly in China's far west Xinjiang region. There are about 10 million Uyghurs, and they're mostly Muslim. Islam is unrelated to Falun Gong spiritually, but from the Communist Party's perspective, it's the same problem. There are lots of Uyghurs, and they believe in something other than the Communist Party. So the party remedied that with this: concentration camps. I bring that up because on March 1st, 2020, the China Tribunal issued a final judgment about whether the Chinese regime was harvesting organs from these two groups of people, Falun Gong and Uyghurs. It came after 2 long years of personal testimony and poring through evidence, and long hearings that practically nobody watched, and statements hardly anyone read about because Western media like the New York Times were too busy getting paid by Chinese state-run media to run advertisements that look like articles. Anyway, on March 1st, the China Tribunal issued this 562-page judgment that we read through so you don't have to. It concluded, among other things, that forced organ harvesting has happened in multiple places in the People's Republic of China and on multiple occasions for a period of at least 20 years and continues to this day. It says that the victims are mostly Falun Gong practitioners and that Uyghurs are also sometimes victims and could be China's living organ bank for the future. That's the Chinese Communist Party for you, always thinking ahead. Finally makes sense why Chinese authorities have been collecting DNA from all the residents of Xinjiang. I'll note, by the way, that the China Tribunal was led by a panel of 7 experts from several countries. It was chaired by Sir Jeffrey Nice. He's the attorney who led the prosecution of the former Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic for war crimes back in the 1990s. And none of the people on the panel were Falun Gong practitioners or Uyghurs, nor were any of them YouTube celebrities who could have told them that nobody wants to read a 562-page report about mass murder. So, I'll just give you the highlights of the mass murder. Here are some of the reasons the China Tribunal concluded that the Chinese Communist Party really is killing people for their organs. 1. There are extraordinarily short waiting times for organs. You can literally schedule an organ transplant in 2 weeks to take place on a certain day. In America, you might wait months or years for some guy to die in a motorcycle crash. In Communist China, the doctors just kill him for you. 2. The Communist Party routinely tortures Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs. It's not a big leap from torturing people to simply killing them. And if you also sell their organs, it's a great way to make money. 3. China built a massive organ transplant infrastructure starting in 2001. That's when the number of annual transplants began to boom. So they were building new hospitals and training new transplant doctors, but China didn't create its voluntary organ donation system until 2010. So that's super weird. And even today, there are very few voluntary organ donors in China. And that's tied to number 4. Chinese authorities don't execute enough criminals to account for the number of transplants. The data suggests that Chinese hospitals do between 60,000 and 100,000 organ transplants per year. But China only carries out fewer than 4,000 court-ordered death sentences each year. So there aren't enough criminals to execute. And China's voluntary organ system only started 9 years after the transplant boom and is still really small. That leads to only one conclusion. Chinese hospitals have been killing tens of thousands of additional people every year who aren't criminals or voluntary donors. The China Tribunal did, by the way, invite the Chinese government to join in and present their own testimony. The Chinese government did not respond at any point during the 2 years. But one of the interesting things about having a formal, open process like the China Tribunal is that it's a forum for people to submit testimony who otherwise might not have had their voices heard. One person who submitted testimony was Didi Kirsten Tatlow, a former New York Times reporter. Tatlow had tried to do a series of investigations into China's forced organ harvesting, but her editors shut her down. As a New York Times reporter in 2016, she was invited to an event held at Beijing Hospital, where state health officials talked about China's organ donation program. Over lunch, she overheard a conversation between two Chinese transplant doctors, which suggested they were being told they could no longer use prisoners of conscience for organ harvesting. But when she told her editors she wanted to investigate further and do a series of stories about Chinese hospitals using prisoners of conscience for organ transplants, it became clear to her that the issue was unwelcome at the New York Times. Now, on top of the conclusions from the China Tribunal, there's this very long, very detailed, and frankly kind of boring report published last November in a fancy peer-reviewed medical journal. It says a variety of evidence points to what the authors believe can only be plausibly explained by systematic falsification and manipulation of official organ transplant data sets in China, and that this is often incentivized by large cash payments. And you wonder why forced organ harvesting isn't getting much media attention. All the smart people who research this stuff make it sound super complicated. So let me put it simply, because this video is not made for just graduate school students. The Chinese Communist Party is lying about the data. They're killing people for their organs, and they're making lots of money. And if you think, maybe this stuff happened before, but it couldn't possibly still be happening, consider this. Even amid the deadly coronavirus outbreak, Chinese hospitals are still doing suspicious organ transplants. The CCP asked for applause for its double lung transplant on a coronavirus victim. But the fact that two matching lungs were found in a few days raises new suspicions of organ harvesting. So at this point, there's really no other conclusion you can make, unless you're the New York Times and just quash the reporting. And stay tuned after the break. We'll look at how Taiwan is handling the coronavirus versus China. Hint, Taiwan has a better solution than this. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party has taken some pretty heavy-handed measures to contain the spread of the deadly coronavirus, like putting an entire province of 58 million people under lockdown, restricting the movements of more than half the country, and forcing people who might be sick into quarantine centers against their will. The World Health Organization has praised how China has handled the coronavirus outbreak.
Almost all member states were praising China for what it did. China took action massively at the epicenter, at the source of the outbreak.
And even some Western media have been praising the China model. This article suggests that drastic measures, similar to those deployed by China and imposed in parts of Italy to contain the epidemic, are now overdue elsewhere. Yeah, I can't wait to see this in America. And Chinese state-run media haven't just been praising their own authoritarian system. They've also been highlighting criticism of the United States and other democracies for their coronavirus response. Which, of course, shows just how superior China's authoritarian response to the coronavirus has been. As long as you ignore the part where they let it spread uncontrolled for weeks and detain people for talking about it. But democratic Taiwan has taken a very different approach to the coronavirus than mainland China, and it's kept the number of infections and deaths shockingly low. Based on the numbers, Taiwan should have been hit really hard by the coronavirus. In mainland China, there have officially been 80,000 infections. The true figure is probably at least a few 100,000 because there aren't enough healthcare workers or test kits to test all the people who are at risk. Not to mention the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has a keen interest in keeping the official count low. Taiwan's population is 1/60th of China's. Based on that, you might expect Taiwan to have at least 1,000 cases, but it only has 47. That's really few, especially given that millions of people travel between China and Taiwan each year. And especially given that the World Health Organization has excluded Taiwan from participating in WHO programs because of pressure from China. So why are there so few cases in Taiwan? Especially when there are so many cases in South Korea, Italy, and Iran. It's because Taiwan's response to the coronavirus has been diligent, open, and transparent. It's no secret what Taiwan's leadership thinks about the Chinese Communist Party.
President Tsai Ing-wen says Beijing is the biggest threat to Taiwan's free and democratic way of life.
And it turns out, Taiwan recognizing Beijing's threat on all levels has been a very wise perspective for handling the coronavirus. As of what we know now, the first coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, China started sometime around early December last year. But the Chinese officials covered it up until January 20th. That's when Chinese leader Xi Jinping first publicly admitted that the new coronavirus was a thing and that officials should make resolute efforts to curb the virus. But a full 3 weeks before that, while Xi Jinping was giving his New Year propaganda speech and most people in China had no idea about the coronavirus, Taiwan's leadership was already on the ball. On December 31st, 2019, when the World Health Organization was notified of pneumonia of unknown cause in Wuhan, China, Taiwanese officials began to board planes and assess passengers on direct flights from Wuhan for fever and pneumonia symptoms before passengers could deplane. Then, as early as January 5th, 2020, notification was expanded to include any individual who had traveled to Wuhan in the past 14 days and had a fever or symptoms of upper respiratory tract infection. And soon, the Taiwan government began a highly effective campaign to educate the public. Taiwan's Minister of Health has given numerous matter-of-fact speeches about the risks of the coronavirus and how people can protect themselves. President Tsai Ing-wen made this video about how pharmacies are rationing surgical masks. Taiwan is using a mask rationing system to stop people from hoarding and price gouging masks. At the same time, Taiwan has also dramatically increased their mask manufacturing. And President Tsai Ing-wen demonstrated social distancing by using a traditional greeting instead of a handshake. Much better than the social distancing most of us experienced in high school. Not me, of course. And most importantly, Taiwan's government at all levels has pushed the most important message over and over again. Wash your hands, your filthy, filthy hands. And because it's Taiwan, a lot of the messaging involves cuddly mascots. Like this Shiba Inu who tells you to wash your dirty paws, cover your snout when sneezing, and keep a positive attitude while doing epidemic prevention. How can you say no to that face? That's so much better than Corona-chan. But I wouldn't want you to think that Taiwan's disease prevention relies entirely on Shiba Inus. They're also using robots. One elementary school in Taiwan built these Lego robots to dispense disinfectant. Side note, when you're washing your hands with soap, you should scrub them for a full 20 seconds. That's how long it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. You don't have to sing it out loud. Or you could recite the Litany Against Fear from Dune. That works too. One reason Taiwan has done such a good job fighting the coronavirus is because of their experience with the Sars epidemic in 2003, where more than 400 people in Taiwan were infected. Less than a year later, Taiwan established the National Health Command Center, or NHCC. The NHCC is meant to serve as a disaster management center command point, coordinating and advising authorities at a regional and central level so that in the case of a new outbreak, no time and resources are wasted. The NHCC used technology to merge the databases for Taiwan's national health insurance system and its travel entry system. Persons with low risk were sent a health declaration border pass via SMS to their phones for faster immigration clearance. Those with higher risk were quarantined at home and tracked through their mobile phone to ensure that they remained at home during the incubation period. So instead of forcibly quarantining 58 million people, Taiwan only quarantined the small number of individuals who actually posed a risk to others. Yeah, that's a much better system than this. Taiwan has also fared a lot better than some of the countries that have joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. South Korea, Italy, and Iran all have serious outbreaks right now, and their governments all have strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Consider this. China's official position is that travel restrictions are an overreaction. And China has criticized the West for spreading negative, twisted falsehoods about the coronavirus. I'll bet certain governments felt political pressure to not take massive action back in January, when the coronavirus could have been more easily stopped. For example, Italy joined China's Belt and Road last year. That may be why they hesitated to impose a travel ban on visitors from mainland China. Of course, the coronavirus has now spread to more than 9,000 people in Italy, and the entire country is on lockdown. South Korea and Iran also didn't issue travel restrictions or do big public health campaigns early on, perhaps to avoid upsetting Beijing. On the other hand, Taiwan started taking action a full 3 weeks before the Chinese Communist Party even admitted there was an outbreak. They ignored the pressure, and they did it right. The lesson? Good things come to those who don't trust the Chinese Communist Party. That's it for today's China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber. But you know, there's a common Chinese saying, "La schmaz." What's that, Shelley? Oh, okay. I'm being told no Chinese people ever say that.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views on an episode, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting.
Ride in luxury to your destination in only double the amount of time it would take you to fly there. Dreams come true. And China is the little engine that could.
I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face.
It's kind of ironic that I'm the minority in a show about China. People in the comments, they'll be like, "You're a traitor." I'm being a patriot. This is my way of showing that I love the country that I came from.
Matt, Shelley, and I went to the Philippines to disputed waters, the Scarborough Shoal.
China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese military is asserting its claims in the South China Sea, so there's a dispute.
We had to take a rickety little Filipino fishing boat surrounded by threatening Chinese Coast Guard vessels.
Chris planted the China Uncensored flag, and then we got away with it. Chris, Shelley, our cameraman, and I went to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, hoping to interview the leader of China, Xi Jinping.
Oh, we are being helped. Going to...
What is it, China Uncensored?
China Uncensored, yeah. I don't suppose there's a chance I could use it.
Down the staircase.
No, all right.
The lead security guard followed us out and said we were banned for life from the Waldorf Astoria.
Chris Chappell here right outside of Mongkok. Our camera guy is in there right now. He's seen people getting beat by police. Police are trying to tear down the tents. Things are wild now.
People would say things to us like, "My professor plays China Uncensored for our class." To see people really believe in what we were talking about was life-changing for all of us.
One word you would use to describe Chris Chappell.
Committed.
Hilarious.
Engaging. Intriguing. Have you heard of China Uncensored? Great comedy show. Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
The way that the U.S. is treating China now, it will start to affect people's lives, and they'll need somewhere to go to learn about that.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国解密.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show available on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.